Hello and well met. This is Layron with Fantasy Grounds Academy. Today I'm going to go over some combat basics and some setup and maybe a little bit of intermediate things. So normally what I'll do is I will do the setup work, then I will prep, and then I'll run the combat. So that's basically the order of this particular tutorial. So there are some basic assumptions that you have at least a standard license and you have access to the SRD or the player's handbook and maybe some other third-party content. Open up my library and I'll show you what I have loaded. So I have the SRD, which is basic, it comes with Fantasy Grounds. I have a battle map that was made by Angela Maps, but Fantasy Grounds actually comes with a few battle maps to get you started. So if you go to modules and you type map, you can search for map pack that comes with Fantasy Grounds. So if you don't have the content already, at least you can start with that. So here's the Fantasy Grounds battle maps. The ones you see in the tutorial videos, and this has been around since the classic days. But this is a good start just to give you kind of familiar with how to do things. The other thing is, I'm not going into character creation, but these characters were not created in this campaign. So I made these characters with access to other content outside of this session. So if you're curious as to how I got all these characters built, I didn't do it with just the SRD. There's a lot of custom stuff, and I used the player's handbook and that sort of thing. So I imported these into this campaign to use for the combat tutorial, so I don't have to spend 2 or 3 hours building characters. With that said, one of the first things I do after the characters are built and I've looked them over is I will add them to the combat tracker and the party sheet. So I'm going to just grab 4 characters. So we have Figano Fetch. He's a male halfling, kind of happy-go-lucky thief type. I'm going to put him on the combat tracker. And then I'm going to add this Dorig Weirdbeard, who is a dwarven cleric. That's one of my favorite characters to play. I'm going to also add Zayla Truesong or Shayra. I think I'm going to do Shayra. She's a sorceress. And then I have a healer, a rogue, a thief, and now I need a fighter. So Lord Galimar is a paladin fighter. All of these characters are 3rd level, I believe. So that's all I'm going to bring over. The rest of these would be a little bit over the top or too much for the demonstration. So I'm going to close the character selection area. Once I have these and I've looked them over and I got them on the combat tracker, then I'm going to grab and drag them over from the icon on the left-hand side over into the combat party sheet, or this is the overview, basically, of the group. So this gives you the overview of the perceptions, armor class, abilities, their hit points, the recovery hit die. You can do group rolls from here. You can manage their inventory from here. So if you add new players or they get new stuff, you can hit the refresh. It'll rebuild the inventory and show you what everyone has. Shows you the overall coins and the items and who has what. This is also where you would reward your allies with potential treasure or loot. For order tab, this is a quick way to set up your watch order. So you might say that Galimar gets 1st or 2nd watch, Dorig gets 1st watch, Shayra 3rd, and Figgin is up in the morning making a campfire and he has the last watch. For the marching in formation, you use this if you want to illustrate or show something if you don't have a map or you're just using theater of the mind. So if you right click on it and go to layers, you can actually set the grid. You just left click and hold down and that will set it. For some reason it won't appear unless you put something on it. So I'm just going to drag Dorig. As soon as I do that, the grid appears. So this is a way that you can kind of look at your players and get an idea of where they are in relationship to each other. So this is a good workaround if you don't have a map and you just want to run everything out of the combat tracker with theater of the mind. This might give you just a kind of a rough idea of where things are, and you can also share this tab in the settings so that your players can access it and they can at least see it. So in the experience points area, this is where you would reward your players with any given quests or encounters. So the party sheet is a powerful tool as well as the combat tracker. They are linked together. and the combat tracker will be linked to the map. So speaking of maps, I'm going to select one from the Fantasy Grounds battle maps that comes with Fantasy Grounds. So if I go to Images and Maps, this will load up because it's in a module format now. It's already part of Fantasy Grounds now. And what I'm going to do is drop down to the filter and filter to Fantasy Grounds battle maps. That way I'm not looking through a ton of different things. There are a bunch of different maps here. There's some outdoor ones. There's some tunnels. There's a couple other street grid ones. I want to take a look at these. I haven't messed around with the street one a whole lot. So see this one because it's pretty open and it gives you, less problems as far as terrain and such. But I do want a little bit of terrain. So there's some like broken rocks and stuff out here. So I think the first one with the fountain might be good. There we go. So this one has a fountain on it. And it looks like it may have a nighttime filter on it or some sort of darkness applied to it. So what I'm going to do is unlock the map. So most maps and images, you can unlock them depending on what source. So if you unlock it, this gives you access to the map tools. And then come over to the line of sight tool. And I noticed that there is some line of sight data, just terrain on the fountain and the benches. Honestly, I don't think the benches would warrant line of sight. The fountain might, depending on how tall it is. But these also provide cover, so maybe that's the reasoning behind it. So I'll just leave that there. There's nothing wrong with it. And then I'm going to go to the lighting tool, and I want to see what's going on as far as the lighting goes. So if you go to the ambient lighting, it is not on, but it is set probably for a darkness thing. So I'm going to go ahead and add dawn or sunlight, and that'll brighten it up. So that just makes it so where you can actually see what's going on. And then the other thing is to size the map to the size you want it within Fantasy Grounds and leave it there. So if I'm just going to kind of center that a little bit and leave a little room in the center here and stretch this out to where it touches over here on the side of this menu. Then when you lock it again, you can right click or you can use the toggle toolbar and you can expand this map out so that it allows for you to view it in a larger preview. That way you're not, constantly moving the map around and having to stretch it. If you do that, if you want to move a map, you can click anywhere on the map with your middle mouse button and drag around and that will move the map. Or you can use this little golden compass thing. It's harder to control, very sensitive. Or you can just use this zoom to fit. Or you can right click and go to layers or go to view, and then you can do zoom to fill, zoom to fit, whatever fancies you. This also looks like it may or may not have a grid, so I want to unlock this and find out. So you go to the grid option. I notice the grid's not on. It's set to 50 by 50, so let's turn the grid on. That's an important step, and it looks like it's already pretty much lined up, so I don't have to mess with it a whole lot. But as you can see, the grid is kind of hard to see. So what I'm going to do is change the tint of it. I'm going to go with this yellow, so it's a little bit more apparent as to what's going on with it. And then you can change the opacity to brighter or lighter. I kind of like it in about the middle, so you can still see it, but it's not too obnoxious. That should be good. Then I'm going to hit OK. But if you wanted to capture a different color, like something on your screen, you can click the eyedropper and hover over a color on your map so you can theme your maps or however you want to do it. I'm going to turn down the alpha a little bit. Hit OK. So that's just a grid that you would put on initially so that you can measure movement and range and that sort of thing. And your threat zones and reach and all that stuff. And the maps are actually tied into that. So once you have this set up, I'm going to put the party members on the map, and I'm going to put them down here in the southern area. Now I can take them in one at a time by the token and drag and drop them onto the map, or I can do it as a group en masse. So if I take the friendly token that's on the bottom of the combat tracker, drag and drop this over, that puts them all on the map. There's no particular order. It doesn't keep the order normally. It just puts them on there the way it wants to. But I noticed it went from the bottom up in this case, so maybe that is somewhat of an order. So I'm going to take the tokens and move them. Now, I'm in grid mode, so I can't engage or interact with any of these tokens. I have to be in play mode. So I'm going to change it to play mode, which gives you access to the very top layer. Now I'm going to set these guys up in a starting area. So I'm going to do that now. They're going to start down here near the sidewalk here, and we're going to call this their starting point. So I'll have this set before the players come on the map and even claim their characters. So that's the real base setup there. So you set up your characters, you put them on the combat tracker and the party tracker, or the party sheet, and then you set up your map and then put them on the map. That's your basics right there. Then once I'm done setting that up, I'm going to go ahead and lock the map, and then I can do whatever, like wait or set up my combat for the next session, and that's what I'm going to get ready to do. So the one thing that I do to help myself run these kinds of things is the organization of the desktop. As you can see, I have the dice tower down here near the bottom next to the combat tracker and the dice. So if I need to roll a hidden roll, I can drag and drop that into the dice tower. That is dependent on the settings. So if you go to options and then you go to show GM rolls on, that needs to be turned on, and table dice tower on. If you only have table dice tower on, it only shows it to your players. So if you want to also see the dice rolls, you will put in the GM chat roll for the hidden rolls. Otherwise, if you turn that off, your rolls are hidden by default. So if you want to do any secretive rolls, you have to roll in the dice tower like your players. And that's all that the difference is there. The other thing is you might want to change the viewing mode that you're in. Right now I have everything showing. So if you just want the game master view or the player view, you can go to sidebar and then change to either play mode or create PC or GM. I'm going to go to GM mode because that's what I need the most. And that kind of narrows down your options so you don't get confused. There are some settings that you can change that affect the way that the combat tracker is used. So you can change the combat tracker NPC hit points. You can go max, random, or standard. I'm going to go to random, but the default is standard. So when I add NPCs to the combat tracker, they'll all have different hit points. The other thing is the diagonal distance for movement. I have it on variant, but you have raw and then you have standard. If you move it on standard, when you're moving diagonally, it just moves to 5 feet for every square. If you put it on variant, it's 5 feet or 10 feet every other square, so you're not moving too far. So I go ahead and turn that on. I do have an extension that I mentioned at the bottom of the description here. It's called the indicator for death indicator. It's set to blood and tomb, and there's a couple other things, but basically it adds a little bit more immersion. Like when your character dies or an NPC dies, it puts a blood splatter on there. So that's kind of a cool little add-on. That's actually free, and it's on the Fantasy Grounds forums, or better yet, it's on the Forge now. So you can subscribe to it. It's free, and it will download and automatically put itself in the correct directory. You just have to enable it before you start Fantasy Grounds. And then there's some other things in here, like, for instance, you have these settings that you can change. So your NPC numbering, you can have it append or you can make it random. And then for adding the NPC initiative, if you have it on, each NPC will roll a separate initiative. By default, it's set to group, so they'd all roll the same. You don't want that if you want the variety. So I put it on, and if you turn it off, you have to roll for all the time for the NPCs. So these are options to change the way the combat tracker behaves when you add NPCs, or if you want certain things to display, or you want to change how this functions a little. These are some of the settings that you're going to use. And you can also affect the tokens a little bit, like scaling and facing and that sort of thing. So that is customized options before you start adding an actual encounter or anything that you want to send over to the combat tracker. You have all those set first before you do that. Now I'm going to start doing a little bit more setup, and then I'll start preparing my encounter. So I have a rogue here. This is Figano Fetch. If I was that player, or regardless, I would have him over here on the combat tracker, also laid out just right next to the combat tracker, and have it open to his actions tab. And all of his stuff is on display here. This is a fully coded character sheet. So if you create your own, you may not look exactly like this. So as I said before, this is a actual setup for when you are, starting from scratch, basically. So not all characters are created equally, but in this case, this character has some short blades, a short bow, and daggers. He has candles, healing potions, oil flask for a lantern. He has food and water, so these are kind of his consumables. He has the Halfling Brave trait, which gives him advantage on saves for all. I don't know if I would activate that yet, but that's basically, it helps him with his saving throws against being frightened. So that would be, if there's a frightened condition coming up, you would enable it, and then the character would basically make the save, and then after that action would expire. So you would only enable that as needed. He has a naturally stealthy thing because he's a halfling, so he can hide next to his allies. So that is something that's a note, so I'd go ahead and turn that on, and that's set to himself. He has second story work, which basically allows him to climb faster and do that sort of thing. So I'm going to enable this just so that I have a note so I don't forget. And then the bottom here are standard actions. So these are things that a player should be setting up as they go. So I would do the same thing from the GM side of things. That way I have access to their sheets if they need help. I really don't want to manage their character, but sometimes you have to help them, so it's easier to have it set this way. So there's the spells are all prepared. I'm going to activate her Fey Ancestry because that's one of her innate abilities. She has a Cloak of Protection, so I want to make sure I add that to her because that'll help her with her saving throws and her armor class. And I don't see any other passive abilities, so I will go ahead and move on. But I'm going to change this to combat and actions when I'm done. So all our spells are prepared. Her passive abilities, the Mask of the Wild is you can hide when lightly obscured. I'll go ahead and put that on too because that's a note. That doesn't change anything. The item of protection, the Cloak of Protection, is certainly something you want. And then here's her meta magic for her sorcery points and such, and spell slots. So Shayra's ready to go. Now Dorig is a dwarven healer. So I'm going to go to his actions tab, take a look. Looks like he has everything. I need to put on the resilience, which is a resist to poison, and he gets advantage on saving throws for poison. The rest of these are all spells. They're passive, or these were passive, these are not. And anything here? Nope. So he's got the Domain of the Forge, so he's pretty good at combat. He can turn undead and such, so that's kind of good. And he also has some consumable items here. So he's on combat and actions as well. And then Lord Galimar, same thing. Go to his actions tab. Take a look at what he has in his inventory. He's got a dagger, a light crossbow, and a magic longsword. He has a few paladin spells. He does have a couple passive abilities. He has Divine Health, which is immune to disease. So that will go on him. And then everything else is situational or spells. So that's the only thing that I activated ahead of time. And the reason I have them stacked like this is when you go to the combat tracker and you click on this little icon to the right, the little red one here, it brings the character sheet right up into view. So you don't have to move anything around. That's one of the biggest problems or mistakes that newer people make is they want to move everything. It's better if you set up the whole desktop first and then play, because then you have a spot for everything and you're not constantly moving stuff around. So it's very important to understand that about Fantasy Grounds. Now I'm going to actually set up an encounter. I don't have anything in mind, but I am going to set up some type of goblinoid thing that they can fight. These are all third level characters. They should be able to handle a fairly decent posse of goblins. So I'm going to do that. The first things first is I'm going to go to the NPCs. I'm going to see what I have. So I have the SRD loaded. I don't have the monster manual. So I can pick anything out of the SRD. I think this would be a good opportunity to build my own encounter. So I want to look for the NPCs that are actually going to be in the encounter. So I want to grab a goblin. So I'll do a little search to kind of make this a little faster so I'm not scrolling through a ton of things. So got a hobgoblin, which is a fairly tough creature. And then I have these little goblins. So I might have a hobgoblin boss and then the little goblin underlings. It looks to me like they're neutral evil. He's lawful evil, so he's got more of authoritative type thing to him. And they have some different abilities. So I'm going to go ahead and build an encounter based off of these two creatures. So at this point, these are locked. They're read-only, so you can't unlock them. But you could make copies of them if you wanted to crack them open and change some things about them. I'm not going to do that for this tutorial, but you can do that. So I'm going to take and open up encounters. And what I'm going to do is create my own little encounter. So I have a group or a section here that I made called goblins. And this is where I'm going to put the goblins at. So I'm going to go ahead and click Add Item, or you can right-click and add a Create Item. I'm going to call this Goblin Attack. Just for lack of a better title. But it gives me an idea of what it is. Now I'm going to drag the hobgoblin onto the encounter. That adds him to the combat encounter. And then the small humanoid goblins, I'm going to add those too. So now I have two different creature types, but they are in the same area here in the encounter itself. Now for the goblins themselves, I'm going to change that quantity to 3. So 3 goblins and a hobgoblin. That should be plenty for the party to deal with. Plus I don't want this to go too long, so I might just do 2 goblins. There we go. You can adjust that, and then you hit the little swirls, swooshy thing on top, which is your refresh, and that gives you the total CR and the XP level. The reason you use encounters is a couple. One, you can set it up like this ahead of time, make it smooth and easier to use. The other is when you go to the party sheet after you're done with this encounter, if your party is successful, not necessarily killing them, but if they're successfully make it through this encounter, whether it's through parlay or capturing them or defeating them in combat, you can award them experience. So if you go to the party sheet and you go to the XP tab, when you're done with this combat encounter, you can drag and drop this into the encounters area, and that will award it to them later when you click the award button. So they haven't defeated it yet, but it's set up ready to go. So that's why you do it this way. If you just add NPCs to the combat tracker, you're going to have to manually add the experience points to the players. So it's much easier to do it in this format than just adding random NPCs. This also kind of gives you an organization view. Let's say you don't like these tokens. So I have a big letter H for the goblin, and I have these little goblin tokens here. I don't mind those, but I'm going to go to my assets library. And this is assuming that you have some content. You might not have this, but I'm going to look for goblins. I have them in a data folder. And I have some custom tokens that I had brought in just for this reason. And I have a folder called Goblinkin. And when I go in there, I have a bunch of different goblins that I can choose from. So for the little guys, I guess I'm going to use a... Let's see. I guess I want to use one for the hobgoblin. So I'm going to take and grab this nice looking token. And what you do is you unlock the encounter and you replace the main token on the left with one of your choice. So I'm going to grab this one with the sword and shield and grab and drag and drop that, and that replaces the token with your own version. So you don't have to necessarily change the creature token on the NPC level, because that's a permanent change. If you just want to do it for this encounter, you can do it from the encounter level. So the goblins can be, the tokens can be replaced. Once you're done doing all that and you've set it up, you can lock the goblin attack and then link it to somewhere where you can find it. So I'm going to link the encounter with this link on the top left corner, drag and drop it onto the map. And this is where the goblins are going to come out and attack the players. So I want to set these up ahead of time. So what I'm going to do is have them laying like on the ground or something, maybe hiding, So I'm going to drag each individual token from the encounter somewhere onto the map. So for this goblin, I'm going to put him over here. And his little buddy is going to go on this corner. And then the leader is going to be back a ways, kind of laying in the grass, waiting for the players to get closer. So they're ready to go. They're set. And again, if I wanted to recall, I have this little pin, and only the Game Master can see that. So this is the way that you set this up. And then when you're ready to run it, you click the down arrow, and they will appear on the combat tracker, and they will not be visible until you're ready for it. So I'm going to close the encounter. These tokens will disappear temporarily because they are not they're not in the combat tracker, and this is just a setup. So I'm going to go ahead and close that. So there's nothing on the map yet except for the players. So let's say it's time to start playing. So I got everything set up except for the goblin sheets, and I'll do that as I go. So because I haven't added them to the combat tracker yet. So now we can make up a scenario where the players have come to an abandoned town, or maybe it's some ruins, and they notice that there's nobody around. So they're going to start exploring. So they will go ahead and opt to move. So as the Game Master, I'm going to hold down the Alt key, and I'm going to initiate the moves for the players. Also, they don't have an initiative order yet. So it's kind of up to you, but I usually have my players roll just so I have some sort of order so that we're not talking over each other. So I'm going to go to the menu and go to Initiative, and I'm going to roll for the PCs. And that puts an order to the sheet here so that they're not all trying to go at once. And I'm going to select Dorag here. He goes first. So he's the first one on the list. Now, as you can see, the map has shifted to accommodate viewing in closer on Dorag. If you don't want that to happen, just resize your map, go to Options, and near the top, you'll notice Turn Auto Center Map. If you don't want that to move on you again like that, turn it off. And players can do the same for themselves. It's not universal. So that's basically how you keep that from shifting around and just move it yourself. So Dorag's going to go first. He can move 25 feet because he's a dwarf. So if you pull up his sheet on the main tab, it tells you he can move 25 feet. Fantasy Grounds doesn't prevent that, or it doesn't penalize you or anything. It just allows you to keep track of movement. So if you hold down the Alt key and you move the player token as the Game Master, this is what you'll see. You don't have to keep holding it down once you have initiated the movement, unless you stop, of course, and start over. So that is his movement. Once he's moved, I'm going to go ahead and approve it. So he's moved up here. He's taking a look at this fountain area, and he's kind of taking a look around. So that's his turn. So the next is the Shayra the Sorceress. And as you can see, the token is highlighted. So it's basically letting you know that it's her turn. I'm going to do the same thing. Hold down the Alt key and move her. But she can move further. So if you go to her sheet and on her main tab, she can move 35 feet because she's a wood elf. So if I move her token, it's going to be 35 feet. So she's going to move up like Dorag did. And then move over to the grass. And then once I've moved her, I can approve her movement. Then I go to the next turn, and there's Figgin. So Figgin O'Fetch, the rogue, he's going to move over towards the stuff and take a look at the fountain. He's pretty curious. So he can move 30 feet, I believe, or 25. Let me look at his sheet. Yeah, 25. So again, hold down the Alt key and move him towards his goal there. So that's basically where he's moving to. Galimar is going to move the other direction. They're kind of fanning out so they can see what's going on. So Lord Galimar is going to move his 30 feet and he's going to move up to this grassy area, the grassy knoll. So I'm going to go ahead and hold down the Alt key, initiate the movement, and then move him on the map accordingly. So that's basically his movement for this round. So that's basically how you move things. When your players are moving, if there's no line of sight on the walls, it's not going to prevent them from going through objects. So if they do that, just cancel the turn and ask them to redo it. That's basically what you're... And I want to go back to the line of sight and make sure that's turned on. So, yes, it is. So this is the player preview. With line of sight enabled so that you can see that they can't look past these objects unless they get closer. So that's kind of how it would look from the player view. It's daytime, but if I change the ambient light from outside, let's say go to the lighting and go to the behavior type, or excuse me, the preset. Let's see, we want the ambient lighting. Right now we're on sunlight, so if you go to dusk or moonlight, it's going to be pretty dark. It'll be hard to see. So that's how I'm going to leave it, because I want it to be kind of a nighttime encounter. So you got crickets and frogs and all kinds of things making noise. Okay, so what happens now is when you take possession of the token as a player, you can still see a little bit from the moonlight, but you're pretty much stymied or slowed down because of the amount of vision. And Lord Galimar is a human, so if I go to his character sheet and I check out his torches here, these are not coded yet, so the torch only is a marker. It's not really anything coded. So what I mean by coded is there's no damage, there's no light function. So if you don't have that, you can always go to the actual interface and go to the effects area on the top right corner. And you'll see some presets for candles and lanterns and torches. So I'm going to give him a torch. I'm going to go ahead and click one on his sheet so I can keep track of how many he's used. And then I'm going to drag the effect onto him, and it will track how many rounds, and it will actually place 30-foot radius around him. So let me grab the torch, and I'm going to just drag and drop it onto his combat tracker entry, or you can put it on the token if you want. And that gives him his torchlight. So he's lit up a torch, and he's like, "Yeah, I want to, put a little light in the subject." So that's basically the extent of his torch. Unfortunately, the goblins see that too, so they know right where he is. So that he doesn't know the goblins are there yet, but that's his turn. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the next thing. Shayra doesn't really move too much more. She steps into the grass, so I'm going to hold down the Alt key. She moves up, looks around, sniffs the air. She says, "I don't know if I like what's going on here." So I'm going to roll to see if the goblins actually are stealthy enough to hide. So I'm going to bring up the encounter that I made, which is this little stat block thing. And I'm going to hit the down arrow. And when I do so, it puts them on the combat tracker, but it also puts them on the map where I placed them. So these were placed ahead of time. Once they're there, the party members can't see them because they're basically hidden. They're still grayed out. To make them visible, there's a little eyeball. It's next to each of these. I can reveal them as needed. They are just beyond the torchlight, so I'm not going to reveal them. And I'm actually going to roll a stealth roll. So I'm going to go to their stat block. And again, I'm going to lay these out just like the character sheet, so I have access to them as I use them. So I would do this probably ahead of time, or take a minute to lay them out. This way it's easier when you're running this. So I'm going to roll the Hobgoblin. He doesn't have actual stealth, so I'm going to roll his thing, and if he fails, then the rest of them. So we're going to do a Dexterity Check. I don't really have the skill. I'm going to drag and drop it. I can do it in the dice tower, which is where I want it. Or I can do it in the chat window. The only problem is that the players will see it because it's not hidden. So that's something you got to take in consideration. So here's the dice tower. I can right click and lock it into place. Now I'll drag and drop the check into the dice tower. And the total is probably a low number. Yeah, it's 9. So if you go to your party sheet where all the members are, and you go to the main tab, everybody here has over 9. So they're not really hidden, they're just out of sight. So Shayra says, I smell something. It smells familiar. I think we have some company. So she immediately goes on the defensive. So she goes to her spell repertoire here, and she starts to look at her spell, and she casts Mage Armor. So I'm going to drag and drop Mage Armor either on her token or in the combat tracker. So I want to go to the combat tracker, drag and drop it. That adds the extra bonus for her armor class. Now I have to manually check off her spell slot, so that's a first level spell slot. So she casts the spell and kind of waits to see what's going to happen. And that ends her turn. And I think she might move over to the bench, or maybe she still has a little movement, so I'm going to just move her over to the bench in case she needs to take cover or something. So she's kind of, I wouldn't say crouching, maybe kneeling right here. So that's her turn. So to hit the down arrow, Dorig says, yes, I hear you. So I select his token, and as you can see, he's got dark vision. So he can see further out without the torch, because he sees black and white, but it's added to the torchlight, so it's accumulative. So he's going to move up a little, maybe 10 feet, and then cast a spell himself. So he's going to, I'm going to hit the Alt key or hold on to it, and then let go, because I've already initiated. And he moves half his rate, so he kind of cautiously moves up, and then he casts a spell. So you think he's going to cast a Bless spell. So if I click on his entry in the combat tracker and bring up his sheet, he has his first and second level spells, and then he has standard action. So I'm going to go ahead and do Bless. So Bless is a good spell to have. So I'm going to first put the Bless effect on him, which is this little C for the concentration, because that allows Fantasy Grounds to check for concentration spells when it comes to his turn. And if he takes damage from one of the goblins, it might drop the spell, the effect of it. And then for the spell effect, he's able to cast it on 4 people at the most in range. So I'm going to go ahead and cast it at 2nd level so I can add that 4th person. And then I'm going to draw out the radius. So from him, he can cast the spell, but if you wanted to know, you could draw a circle around him just to get an idea. So if you right-click on anywhere on the map, click pointers, and go to the draw circle. You left-click and drag this out from the center. There's 30 feet radius. And then you move the center of the radius on top of your player. And he can get actually almost everyone except for Figgin. So I'm going to change that to a first level spell only. And now I'm going to drag and drop the effect on those who are in range. So this will be for the Shayra, and then the effect is going to go on himself. So did I do that right? Yep, Bless. And then it's going to go on Galimar, and it's going to go on himself. So that is how the Bless is applied, and the effect is in the combat tracker as well, so you can see who has it and that sort of thing as the Game Master. So that's his turn, and when you're done with this radius, you right-click, go to pointers, and you can remove the pointer. It's just a temporary way to see who's all in your range. There's no auto-targeting or anything like that. That's something that you'd have to make as an extension. So that's just a way to handle it. So now the next thing is to go ahead and move the turn to Figgin. So Figgin is going to move up, and he's going to stand kind of beside Shayra and hide. So I'm going to initiate his movement. So that's 5 feet. He's moving stealthily, so I got to roll that too. And I go to his sheet, and on his skills tab, he has a pretty good stealth roll, so I'm going to drag and drop that into the dice tower. Yeah, he rolled a total of 17. The passive perception on the goblins is very low, so they don't notice him. So he snuck up. He's hiding behind Shayra, and he's going to pull out his bow. That's his turn. So he's setting up for a sneak attack. So he has a short bow, and he's hiding behind Shayra, and he's allowed to do that because of his naturally stealthy. So that's how that works. So now I'm going to hit the down arrow. The goblins are going to attack. So they're all going to come out at once. They're not going to stage it or do anything like that. So in order to do that, I'm going to click on Show All NPCs. So they stand up and they start their attack. So goblin number 1 is only going to move 15 feet because he was on the ground crouched. So he has to stand up. So he's going to move forward just 1 square. He's going to use his bow. And he's going to target Shayra. So Shayra's down here. To target something, you have to take possession of the token first. That's important. So whatever token that's making the attack, you have to take possession of it. If you click on it again, that does not mean I'm possessed with that token. If I click on it again, that means it is. It has to have this ring around. Now I'm going to hold down the right control key and click on Shayra. It shows 45 feet distance. If you look at the description of the short bow in the combat tracker, it tells you the range, 80 to 320, 1 target, does piercing damage, so it'll work. So once she's targeted, all I have to do is double click on the attack roll for the short bow. And it rolled a total of 15, and I guess it missed. So her armor class helped. So it came close to hitting her, but it missed. So the arrow whistles by and just kind of goes over her shoulder. So that is basically its turn. He starts screaming and jumping up and down and getting all mad. So that was his turn. So goblin number 2 is going to do something similar. He's going to move down a couple squares. So again, I'm going to hold the Alt key. And that gives him the path of movement. I'm going to go ahead and prove it. And he's going to target Lord Galimar. Kind of the same way. I had possession, and now I'm holding down the right control key, clicking on my target. Now he's going to do the same thing. He's going to shoot his bow, so he draws the arrow back. And he also missed. So these characters that we have pretty good armor class. So he's all mad, and he looks at his partner, and he kind of gives him a dirty look, like, dang it. So that's his turn. The Hobgoblin is going to move up and try to engage the party hand to hand. So he's going to take the risk and move forward. So he's going to I'm going to initiate the move by holding down the Alt key. So he can move 30 feet according to his stat block. You double check. Yep, 30 feet. He has chainmail. He's got pretty much hit points. He's an important NPC. I'm going to check that because that will give him death saves. So that's part of that extension that I have. And then he speaks Common and Goblin, and once per turn he can deal an extra 7 or 2d6 damage to a creature it hits with a weapon if that creature is within 5 feet of an ally of the Hobgoblin that isn't capacitated. So he can do extra damage if any of these allies are next to a target. He has a longbow and a short bow. So I think he's going to take a longbow out, and he's going to attack Dorag here. So again, I'm going to make sure I have possessed of the token. Hold down the right control key, click on Dorag. It's 35 feet. Got a longbow, it should be plenty of range, so I'm going to double click on the attack roll. He rolled a 1, so he automatically missed. He basically dropped his bow. So he can either try to pick his bow up and end his turn, or he can skip the turn and just go for it, but he can't use his bow for a while. So it's up to him. So he's going to pick the bow up and try to recover it. So that ends his turn, basically. Okay, so Lord Galimar is seeing the action that's going on here. So he is going to dash. So he cannot take any actions other than run, basically. So I'm going to hold down the Alt key, and I'm going to move double his movement rate, which is 60 feet. So he moves up to engage this bigger hobgoblin, and he has to end his turn there because he can't attack or do anything else because he did the dash move. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the next actor. So it's Goblin number 2's turn. So he is going to move in to help his ally. So again, I'm going to hold down the Alt key. And he's going to take a real quick attack on Galimar with his bow before he reaches. This time he shoots Galimar right in the back with an arrow. And did 5 points of damage, so that hurt. So Galimar's like, he arches his back inwards. It's like, you little... So he turns around, he sees, or kind of looks back, and he sees a little goblin coming at him. So that didn't feel too good. So now the hobgoblin is going to take him on. So he's got his longsword. I'm going to untarget whoever he had targeted before. So he had Dorig targeted. So with possession of that token, I'm going to hold down the control key, click on the target, and that clears the target. So you just undo it. And now I'm just going to drag and drop his longsword attack onto Galimar. And that was a miss. So Galimar is able to raise the shield up in time to keep that from happening. Very lucky. So, wow. Okay. Okay, Shayra sees this action going on. So she's going to pull and dip into her magic missiles. So she's got a magic missile ready. She can cast it at 2nd level, but I'm going to cast it at 1st. So she gets 3 missiles, so she's going to go after these 2 goblins here. So first she's going to go after the hobgoblin. And these are automatic damage. So if I pick up this damage and right-click on it, that'll be 2. There's 5 points of damage, so she didn't do enough to kill him, so I'll drag 1 more. That actually softened him up a little, so he's got heavy damage on him right now. So he's got these smoldering holes in him from the magic missiles. So she put out her palms and shot out these missiles from her hands. They're kind of like a purplish color, and it barreled into his chest, so that hurt. And that's basically her turn. So I got to make sure I check off her spell slot. That's that. And pass the turn. Alright, so Figgin is now in place. He is now hidden. So I'm going to put the hide action on him first. So he's hidden. And he gets to have advantage because he is hiding. So, yep. So I'm going to go ahead and put advantage on his attack roll. He's going to target this goblin over here. So again, basically take possession of his token and then hold down the right control key and click on Goblin 2. Now what I'm going to do is execute the attack roll. So on his character sheet, I'm just going to double click because the creature is targeted. I'm just going to double click on the attack roll for the short bow. Thank God he got advantage because he dropped a 1 and it turned to a 16 plus his bonus 21. So he was able to get advantage on that. So once that happens, I need to turn on the sneak attack damage. So that will add the extra dice, so it's another 2d6. So you might take this guy out, we'll see. So now I'm going to double click on the bow damage. Oh yeah, so it took him out, and if you notice, there's a little tombstone here. The goblin is dead, so that takes care of that goblin. So if you want, you can remove the goblin from the combat tracker just to free up the resources. So you do that by double-clicking on the combat tracker on this little red round delete item. And that took him out, so nice shot. So he's going to stay there, and he's not going to move. So that's his turn. That Figgin is happy. Alright, so goblin number 1 witnessed his partner going down, so he's going to engage the goblin, or the Galimar. He has one of the players targeted. So I'm going to take possession of his token and then hold down the right control key and click on the target. So now he's no longer aiming at Shayra. Hold down the Alt key, approve the movement, and then swing his scimitar. And he might have, let's see, as nimble escape. So with that, he can disengage as a bonus action. But he doesn't have pack tactics or anything, so he's good. So he's going to just swing his scimitar onto the character for the Galimar. So just going to swing. He takes his little scimitar and tries to jab at him, but it misses. It just kind of rolls off his side. So Galimar is holding his own. And that's basically his turn. I think he's going to potentially disengage if he misses again, but for the time being, he's going to stay there. Okay, so Dorag is going to move closer to help Galimar. So I'm going to move him to 25 feet. So I'm holding down the Alt key, and then I let it go as I get closer. And that's basically where he goes. And then he reaches out to touch Galimar in a healing motion. So I have him selected. Beard Dorag here. And he's going to do a touch spell, which is the healing. So that's a first level spell. And that is going to give him an opportunity to heal Galimar. So it's 1d8 plus 3. So I'm just going to drag and drop it onto Galimar on his token. And that gives him 6 healing, which negates all the damage that he had. So that was a good move for Dorag. So that was good. And he's gonna just kind of stay there because he's moved his full movement rate. And he just tells the others to focus on the hobgoblin. He'll take care of the goblin to the north. So that's his turn. Okay, so Galimar has some special abilities here. So he has Divine Smite. So what I'm going to do is take and try to finish off the hobgoblin. So I'm going to bring up his character sheet. And I'm going to attack with his longsword first. So I'm just going to drag and drop the attack roll onto the hobgoblin. Oh, wow. A natural 20 plus a plus 4 bonus. So I don't think I'm going to need the Divine Smite. Let me see. Nah, I won't need it. Hobgoblin's only got 4 points left. So I'm just going to go ahead and just roll regular damage. So if I drag and drop that damage, it's going to do the critical damage on top of that. So grab this, drag it on top of the goblin. Yeah, it rolled the extra dice. The goblin's dead. So there's a blood splatter there. I'm going to leave him on here because he actually has the important NPC thing. So he's unconscious. When it goes to his turn, it'll roll to see if he makes his death save. So that's kind of a cool little feature of the death tokens. So I'm going to hit the down arrow to end the turn because he's still in combat. Fantasy Grounds just rolled, and he did make his death save, but he's still unconscious. He's bleeding out still. So Galimar gets to go again. So basically Galimar is going to attack at this goblin here. So that will basically take this blade and turn and take his attack out. He might do the Divine Smite in case, so we'll see what happens. So he drag and drops that onto the enemy. It hits. So I'm going to apply Divine Smite, which is just an extra damage roll. So that goes on to the Paladin temporarily. And now I'm going to drag and drop the damage roll. And that adds all the extra dice. So, oh, geez. Instant kill. So that goblin didn't even have a chance, so he's out. So that's basically his turn for the Paladin. And now I'm going to go to Figgin. Figgin O'Fetch is just going to stay there in hiding. So he's not moving, so I'm just going to pass turn. Shayra is like, turns around and says, "What are you doing back there?" And she kind of heckles him a little bit, like, "Why do you have to stand behind me? Drawing all the targets to me." So that's her little complaint, and she's kind of keeping an eye out, making sure there's no other attackers. The Doric is going to say, "You all right there, Galimar?" And Galimar says, "Yeah, thanks. Just in time. Looks like we defeated the goblins, or the hobgoblins." So we're going to hit next actor, and it goes to Figgin. He basically he didn't. He's not doing anything. Shayra's not doing anything. The hobgoblin has basically succeeded on his death save. So let's see what else happens. No one else is fighting, but Galimar says, "Should we end his life?" And everyone's like, "Yeah, probably." And does he make his next one? Oh, he made it. So he's got this, he's stable, but he's no longer dead. So what they'll do is they'll bind him, and they'll question him later. That Band-Aid means that he's stable now. But he's not conscious, but he's still stable. So he's okay. So he's just kind of, he's not bleeding out anymore. So that's basically how that plugin works. So you can use that for the good effect. So I'm just going to erase them off there for now. So that's basically how a basic combat would go. Obviously, there's going to be more complications due to the effects that your players may or may not have. That also can be affected by terrain and vision. So you have modifiers down here at the bottom, which allow you to add for or calculate for penalties. There's disadvantage and advantage. There's a modifier box, so if you have to add a modifier or take something away, you can do that if it's not a 2 or a 5. And then for the time being, the players might ask me to do a short rest, so I will go to the menu, I will go to rest, and I will go to short rest. And if they had any wounds or anything, then they would potentially they would want to do that. And the torch went away because it went to a full hour, so the torch expired. So they can hang out here and camp a little bit and maybe clean up and kind of question that hobgoblin they captured. So that would basically be the gist of this encounter. And then to award them for their bravery and for defeating the goblins, I already gave them the XP for this. So if I go to, I haven't awarded it yet, but I gave it to them because I anticipated that they were going to win. So I'm going to go ahead and take and put the let's see, the party sheet. It's already on the party sheet in the XP field. So if you go down to the bottom, there's a goblin attack. It's worth 200. So if I click award, it's going to add to these guys' character sheet. So I'm going to click award, and now they're getting closer to leveling up. I got to change Shayra's sheet because she doesn't have the next level on it. So her next level is 2700. Some GMs don't even use XP, they use milestones, so it really depends on your game style, or if you're playing Adventure League or something like that. So that's how you keep track of their experience points. I don't know why she only has 94. That doesn't make sense. She should have 994. So I'll go to fix hers. Probably a little typo or something. Okay, so she's ready to go. So that's basically how that would work. You set up your map, you set up your sheets and everything, and then you execute all your attacks. As the game master, you have to hold the Alt key to get that little arrow thing to show up for movement. And then you're going to prove it. So players can't move through walls if they have occluders, but there might be a terrain thing where might slow them down, like out here, there's these rocks. You might say they might lose 5 feet of movement. They have to go through the rocks. So that's up to you how you want to run the lighting situation and the environmental stuff. So that's basically all I'm going to show for right now. I think that's a good, I wouldn't say quick, but a good amount of time. It's almost been an hour. It's actually almost an hour right on. So hopefully that helps you guys a little bit.